Hawkeye is about to write a letter now, not to Anne Robinson, but to President Truman, asking him to stop the war in MASH on 2 shortly.
The war may be over, but thousands of Kuwaiti families have loved ones missing in Iraq. They sign petitions, they hold demonstrations, and they wait.
We don't know what we have done to Iraqis. Our government were so kind with Saddam Hussein.
Some prisoners of war make it home, but with stories of horrific torture. Meanwhile, in Kuwait itself, Palestinians accused of being Iraqi collaborators are disappearing.
25 days, I didn't know where he is. He's alive or he's alive. What can I do?
Inside Story, the missing in half an hour.
Now, on BBC1, the 9 o'clock news with Martyn Lewis.
Rajiv Gandhi's widow has been chosen to succeed her murdered husband as head of India's Congress Party. The lying-in state of the leader, police say, was embraced by a suicide assassin wired with explosives. Sonia Gandhi has yet to announce whether she will pick up her husband's mantle. Good evening. Rajiv Gandhi's widow Sonia is tonight considering whether to take her murdered husband's place as leader of India's Congress Party. She was formally elected to the post by the party's highest decision-making body, which said there is no question of her refusal. But Mrs. Gandhi, who was born Italian and has little political experience, has yet to say whether she will carry on the Gandhi dynasty. The vast subcontinent is reported calm tonight after the general election was postponed for a fortnight. There is still no indication who ordered the assassination, but police think it was carried out by at least one woman who detonated explosives attached to her body as she offered Rajiv Gandhi a garland of flowers.
As the security forces maintain maximum alert throughout India tonight, Rajiv Gandhi lay in state in this capital. He was completely shrouded because he sustained such disfiguring wounds in last night's bomb blast. Thousands passed by the body of the former Prime Minister. Almost submerged in the flow of mourners is Rajiv Gandhi's Italian widow, Sonia, showing great fortitude. Tonight, her husband's Congress Party asked Sonia Gandhi to become their new leader. The outcome of that request was awaited by the mass of people queuing to file past Rajiv Gandhi's body. There'd been one brief moment of trouble when the security forces fired tear gas to restrain angry crowds. Tonight, the whole of India is braced for possible further violence. There have been a few deaths already, but this capital is quiet at present. The remaining 2/3 of this tainted election, which cost Rajiv Gandhi his life, have been put off until the middle of next month, if indeed they take place at all. It's exactly 24 hours since his fateful journey to the southern state of Tamil Nadu. This is the field 25 miles from Madras where Rajiv Gandhi was killed, along with several security men and at least 2 civilians. The pavilion had been built by Congress Party workers. Today, the police tried to hustle away our camera crew. The bomb might have been remote-controlled or possibly detonated by a terrorist on a suicide mission. This was the immediate aftermath, as described to the Indian people.
There was a loud explosion, possibly on the rear side of Mr. Gandhi, smashing his head instantly. Initially, it was mistaken for a burst of a cracker to welcome him. An old lady who had come to greet Mr. Gandhi was also blown to pieces.
This morning, an Indian Air Force plane carrying Mr. Gandhi's body landed in Delhi. The President of India, together with the caretaker Prime Minister, Mr. Chandrasekhar, walked to the plane to solemnly witness Mr. Gandhi's final return from the political battlefield. Mrs. Sonia Gandhi and her daughter had travelled on the plane from Madras. The funeral of the former Prime Minister will take place in Delhi on Friday. The body of Rajiv Gandhi was put in an ambulance to be taken to the All India Institute of Medical Science for a post-mortem. Mrs. Sonia Gandhi travelled in the ambulance. The President of India, in a televised address, appealed for calm.
The heinous assassination of Rajiv Gandhi has caused the nation the deepest anguish. Words cannot adequately express my grief nor condemn this barbaric act.
India's caretaker Prime Minister, Mr. Chandrasekhar, called an emergency cabinet meeting for this morning.
The best course is that we should appeal to the people that in this tragic hour they should keep the cool of their mind and they should cooperate in maintaining law and order, because if we create any law and order problem, we shall be playing in the hands of the forces who are responsible for this type of tragedy to the nation.
A hurried post-mortem on the body of Rajiv Gandhi was carried out at the Medical Institute. Among family mourners was Mrs. Manika Gandhi, the widow of Rajiv's brother Sanjay, who was killed in a plane crash in 1980. Outside the Medical Institute, Congress party supporters chanted, "Long live Rajiv Gandhi." But for others, the news was unbearable. After the embalming of the body, the coffin was carried from the Medical Institute to another ambulance. By then, bewildered, worried crowds had gathered on the route to the chosen spot for the lying-in state, the house of Rajiv Gandhi's grandfather, Pandit Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of independent, secular India. There was a show of strength in the capital as the authorities moved to cool down the hotheads. The troops have orders to shoot on sight any rioters. Rajiv Gandhi died, leaving no heir apparent. At 46, he seemed to have decades ahead of him. This was his final campaign swing just outside Delhi last week. His Congress party, though ostensibly democratic, has been run by one of the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty for half a century. Tonight, the Congress party chiefs called an emergency meeting to decide on a new leader as India mourned the assassination of the dynasty's last serving politician. Emotions were at fever pitch.
They have killed us. They have made us leaderless. But we have still plenty of leaders with us. And we will produce further leaders.
Inside the Congress party caucus tonight, 2 hours of talks produced a startling decision. One reminiscent of the way Rajiv Gandhi, 7 years ago, was nominated to replace his murdered mother.
Congress Working Committee unanimously elected Srimati Sonia Gandhi as the President of Indian National Congress.
If the immediate reaction of this country's influential media was mixed, Congress supporters were pleased. They chanted, "Save Congress, bring Sonia." With a Gandhi at the top, even one born in Italy, this delayed election might still be won and the dynasty preserved. Only 60 hours ago, Sonia Gandhi was at her husband's side when they went to vote in Delhi. It's not known what her reaction will be to tonight's Congress party invitation, but to all intents, she has adopted the Hindu way of life. Rajiv Gandhi will be cremated on Friday at the same Delhi Memorial Park where he performed funeral rites for his murdered mother 7 years ago. His teenage son will light the funeral pyre. Brian Barron, BBC News, Delhi.
And Brian Barron joins us live by satellite from the Indian capital. Brian, I gather that the police now think they know how the murder was carried out, but are they any closer to discovering just who it was who planned it?
Their attention is definitely focusing on Tamil terrorists with connections with the separatist movement in Sri Lanka. But my understanding is the police say that it may have been a freelance operation by a handful of terrorists or just one or two. It may not have been a systematically organized assassination bid by a major terrorist movement.
Is Mrs. Gandhi's election, if she accepts it, a serious political appointment or merely an attempt to capitalize on the great emotion of the moment?
In the very first instance, I think it is an emotional move and an emotional response. How she's going to respond, we've absolutely no idea. She's a widow of 24 hours in deep mourning with a funeral another 24 hours away. But our guess is that there'll be some sort of announcement by her within 48 hours of the funeral, and how her nomination, if she accepted, would go down in the rest of India is very difficult to see. It could play into the hands of the right-wing revivalist BJP, so it's a rather desperate ploy, this, by the Congress Party.
Brian Barron in Delhi, thank you very much indeed. India has been ruled by members of Rajiv Gandhi's family for all but a handful of years since independence in 1947. His grandfather held the post of Prime Minister until his death in 1964. Rajiv's mother, Indira Gandhi, took office 2 years later, and when she was assassinated in 1984, Rajiv became Prime Minister. Now the Congress Party wants the political dynasty to continue with his widow Sonia.
Even before she married, according to Hindu custom, Sonia Gandhi had adopted the ways of India. She'd already learnt to wear a sari and a few words of Hindi, a language she's now mastered. Despite her Italian birth, she'll be presented as a fully assimilated Indian by a Congress party determined to take full advantage of her family connections. She'd first met Rajiv when they were both studying at Cambridge and loyally played her part at his side at home and abroad, even though she was unhappy about the way he was drawn into politics and promoted to the premiership. Her international visits had taken her to the White House and the Kremlin. But her own political experience is limited to what she's picked up on the sidelines of politics. The physical dangers she'd always known. She was sitting alongside her husband when a Sikh gunman fired shots in 1986. But it was the actions of her husband and mother-in-law that are now forcing her to follow them as leader of India's largest political party.
It is Rajiv Gandhi's fault, and it is also the fault of his mother, Indira Gandhi. They deliberately wanted to preserve the Congress Party as, in a sense, their property. They did their best to make sure that there were no rivals fought to them, and because there were no rivals, now there is no obvious choice for the leadership.
Under Nehru, the Congress Party led India to independence. In those days, it was a great unifier, a way of reconciling India's many faiths and castes. Its followers had little in common except their membership, but it kept the country together and largely peaceful. Mrs. Gandhi's rule was more divisive. To hold power, she split the party, alienated some of its traditional supporters. The process accelerated under Rajiv, and as society became more divided, the party's power waned. Today, the Times of India says at no time has the country been as polarized along antagonistic lines. Caste pitted against caste and religion against religion with relentless fury, as if the nation had taken leave of its reason. By reaching out to Sonia Gandhi, Congress are seeking an icon around which they can unify and perhaps pacify. It's an appeal she'll find hard to resist, even though it appears only to delay real decisions until after the election is over.
While much of the suspicion over Rajiv Gandhi's murder has fallen on Sri Lankan Tamil guerrillas, he did have other enemies. They included Sikh extremists who killed his mother and some Hindu fundamentalist groups.
At rally after rally, one issue dominated the now postponed elections: whether India was to survive as a secular state, free of the religious bigotry that has threatened to engulf it even from the earliest days. It was the same vision Mahatma Gandhi campaigned for, but it was one that cost him his life, killed by Hindu extremists. There is a new wave of Hindu revivalism sweeping the country today. At Ayodhya last year, militants began a campaign to tear down a mosque, intent on replacing it with a temple to the Hindu deity Lord Ram. They're backed by the clandestine ranks of the RSS, the stormtroopers of Hindu militancy. They detested Rajiv Gandhi, a man who had apparently forgotten the Hindu way in favor of Western liberalism. Sikh rebels also counted themselves as enemies. At Amritsar 7 years ago, militants fighting for a new Sikh nation set up base in the Golden Temple there. The army was sent in to quell the rebellion by Indira Gandhi, Rajiv's mother. The Sikhs have never forgiven the family for what they saw as a violation of sacred ground. Abroad, the Tamil guerrillas who want a separate state in Sri Lanka have long held a grudge against Rajiv Gandhi. When Mr. Gandhi was Prime Minister, the Tamil Tigers were allowed a base in India. But in 1987, he sent troops to Sri Lanka on what was meant to be a peacekeeping mission. In fact, for 2.5 years, they fought a vicious battle against the Tamil rebels. To them, he was a traitor.
The Tamil Tigers are certainly a possible group. They're split up into various factions. They don't all take commands from headquarters, and there are factions within Madras who have had a grudge against Rajiv and might well have taken this kind of very drastic step.
A killer has no religion. A killer has no caste. A killer has no nationality. And whoever killed him was trying to aim that bomb not only at Rajiv Gandhi, but at India's democracy, India's unity and stability.
It's revenge that will threaten the nation's unity. Poised as it is on the edge of violence, it will be better for India if the culprit were a lone assassin and not a member of a faction.
The Queen has sent a message to the Indian President in which she said she mourned the loss of a man of stature and courage. Buckingham Palace said tonight Prince Charles will represent her at Friday's funeral. Prayers for peace have been said in temples throughout Britain today, and Indian community leaders have appealed for calm.
A photograph of Rajiv Gandhi now sits alongside one of his mother at this Hindu temple in Bradford. His murder, like hers 7 years ago, has stunned the Indian community in Britain. In Birmingham, there were incidents between Sikhs and Hindus following the murder of Indira Gandhi. Community leaders there have appealed for calm and unity and held prayers for peace in India. But while Rajiv Gandhi's death is prompting violence in India, community leaders in London say such difficulties won't be mirrored in Britain.
I think Mr. Rajiv Gandhi's mother, Indira Gandhi, when she was assassinated, at that time, with the good sense of Southall people, I mean, the people succeeded in maintaining the peace and friendship between different communities in the area. I don't think the peace will break down in this area.
Community leaders say that Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims are all shocked by the assassination.
All the temples, mosques and gurdwaras gathered and did prayer for the soul of Mr. Rajiv Gandhi. He lived, he died for the democracy, for the unity of India.
Hundreds of people queued at the Indian High Commission in London to sign a book of remembrance. The Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd and the Labour leader Neil Kinnock will be travelling to India to attend Rajiv Gandhi's funeral.
Now today's other news. The Home Secretary, Kenneth Baker, has confirmed new proposals aimed at ridding Britain of fighting dogs. Importing them was stopped yesterday. Today, Mr. Baker unveiled plans for a complete ban on the ownership and breeding of fighting dogs such as the Pit Bull Terrier. Legislation to compensate owners is being considered. A criminal offence prohibiting dogs being dangerously out of control in a public place is also planned. And compulsory third-party insurance on dogs could be introduced in later legislation.
On the afternoon, the Home Secretary announces the ban. 2 RSPCA inspectors are called to an East London house after a Pit Bull Terrier attack. Inside, they find the dog and its owner, whose arm it has bitten.
She gets too excited, you know.
Yeah, that's one of the problems, isn't it? Very excitable.
She puts her teeth around you. She doesn't mean it.
The dog is taken away to be destroyed. It's incidents like this that have forced the government to act.
When the bill gets onto the statute book, it'll be an offence actually to own that Pit Bull Terrier. And I'm glad to say that the opposition support this, and that dog will have to be put down.
Before ordering the mass destruction of fighting dogs, which he could do by the end of July, the Home Secretary will consider other alternatives. Some animal welfare groups favour neutering the dogs, but Mr. Baker says he's already been advised that a neutered dog could still be dangerous. Mr Baker also rejects further calls for a national dog registration scheme and argues that such a measure could not have prevented any of the recent attacks.
The RSPCA does not support and will not take part in the mass destruction of dogs that have committed no offence. Of course, those that are attacked or have been bred and specifically trained for fighting have to be destroyed. There is no alternative, but not mass destruction as the Secretary of State appears to be proposing.
The Society has received hundreds of telephone calls from confused members of the public. Worried owners are checking whether they need to have their dogs destroyed. Others are determined that if it comes to a cull, they'll protect their pets.
First of all, it wouldn't get through my door. I would not let him in my door to do that to my dog. I love my dogs, and I'm a dog lover. If my dog was vicious, fair enough, but no.
The woman who paid £8,000 for the first Japanese Tosa to be brought to Britain is outraged at the plan.
My dog is not trained as a killer. My dog is just a young male puppy. I'm quite happy to go along with his demands that the dog should be muzzled in public places. I'm quite pleased that my dog can be neutered, just for me to keep my baby, because that is what he is to us.
Several vets have refused to take part in a cull and believe that such a scheme would be unenforceable.
There is no form of registration or licensing, so we don't know how many there are, we don't know who owns them. So what exactly are they going to do? Are they going to stop people in the streets and take the dogs off them, or? I don't know.
But the government seems determined to press ahead and says that its aim is to encourage responsible ownership and reduce the number of savage attacks by uncontrolled dogs.
The main political parties in Northern Ireland have reached agreement on one of the major issues blocking the start of roundtable talks. They decided that when the Irish government becomes involved, the bulk of the discussions will take place at Stormont, with other meetings taking place in London and in Dublin.
Peter Brook's been trying for the last 3 weeks to find a formula acceptable to all sides on the crucial question of where the Ulster politicians meet Irish ministers in the second stage of these talks. Tonight he seemed to have found at least part of the answer.
I don't want to illuminate what we've done with a more rosy hue than it deserves, but the fact remains is that on an issue which was consistently difficult from the moment we started the conversations, we have now reached agreement on an issue in which there is unanimous agreement with everybody involved.
All four parties taking part have agreed with Mr Brook's proposal that they meet the Irish ministers at Stormont, and tonight unionists like Ian Paisley were happy that they can all sit down together next week in the first leg of the process. Whether that does happen depends on the party which wasn't at Stormont today, the nationalist SDLP and its leader John Hume. They left on Monday saying the problems didn't involve them. And while they haven't committed themselves yet, the signs are that the talks proper may finally begin next Tuesday.
The Conservative chairman of the Commons Health Committee has said the government should slow down its changes to the NHS. Nicholas Winterton was speaking after the committee had heard evidence from the Health Secretary and managers of the new hospital trusts at Bradford and at Guy's and Lewisham in London. Both of the trusts have announced substantial job losses since they were set up 7 weeks ago.
It was the business plans of the two hospital trusts that the committee was anxious to scrutinise, but they were disappointed. Neither hospital had produced final plans, and it emerged that many of their financial projections were over-optimistic, particularly in the case of the Bradford Trust, a point the committee's chairman lost no time in raising.
I think we're a little bit concerned that you may be massaging the figures.
You're in danger, Chairman, of embarrassing me in terms of my lack of financial expertise. I understand the financial strategy well enough, but I'm not an accountant, and I do not feel competent to answer questions of detail about the application of a financial regime.
The Trust's vice-chairman couldn't provide the answer either.
I have no more accountancy experience than my friend.
Well, it would appear to the committee that the application that you submitted to the department to get trust status was based upon some extremely optimistic assumptions which in the light of events have not materialized.
Then it was the turn of Guy's chief executive. He was asked whether the trust should have been approved at all.
Guy's and Lewisham and the mental health unit are great provider services in London. There is absolutely no question about their strength in terms of their clinical services. There is now, in our judgment, although we're self-interested, no doubt about the strength of their management.
When the Health Secretary appeared, he was asked why he hadn't intervened to stop the job cuts at Guy's.
If I was to send that message to the National Health Service management, that in spite of all the things we were saying about our drive for devolved management, for professional management, they were going to be totally politicised at the first hurdle, the first time they had to do anything difficult in any hospital, that would have been a dreadful signal to send, so I refused it.
Afterwards, the committee's chairman said he was unconvinced by the performance of the Trust's chief executives.
I hope in the light of the evidence that the department would look very carefully at any future trust application to ensure that it goes forward from a firm basis and not merely on the sort of assumptions that featured in the very severe questioning that we undertook of the chief executives and of the Secretary of State today.
It emerged at the hearing that 2 of the 4 hospitals in the Bradford Trust could close, a move likely to increase pressure on the Health Secretary to slow down the pace of change, or at least to make sure that as far as trusts are concerned, they produce better financial information than those which came under such intense scrutiny today.
The government is to launch a new scheme to regenerate inner cities by inviting councils to compete for money for the best projects. The BBC has learnt that the Environment Secretary, Michael Heseltine, has selected 15 councils which will bid for a share of £75 million worth of grants. Labour's Brian Gould says the scheme amounts to nothing more than a gimmick.
Sorting out the poll tax was Michael Heseltine's first task back in government. That took 6 months, and he now has more time for pet projects. The inner cities are to be involved in a competition for limited government funds. Mr. Heseltine wants housing, local job prospects and the local environment to be improved. He's chosen 15 councils known as pacemakers. They include Newcastle, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool and at least 1 London borough. They'll vie with each other for funds. It's been called competitive bidding. Mr. Heseltine will reward 10 of the 15 with a share of some £75 million. The winners will have to show enterprise and vision.
I don't think it's appropriate, really, to have a kind of lottery to see which authorities will benefit from increased funding. It seems to me quite inappropriate to do it that way. Moreover, it's not at all clear that this is new money. It seems as though it's going to be money taken from some authorities and given to others, and that's not very satisfactory either.
It's 10 years since Mr. Heseltine's first big foray into the inner cities. Labour claimed that failed to reduce unemployment. Mrs. Thatcher followed some years later. That was dismissed by Labour as a publicity stunt, and so is the latest Heseltine scheme. Tories disagree.
Councils are going to be forced to say what do we need and to list that and to make a bid to a third party, in this case Michael Heseltine, to say these are our needs, this is how we think they should be addressed.
The government is quietly trying to improve relations with Labour local authorities, a notable contrast with life under Mrs. Thatcher. But making councils compete for resources they all want is not likely to bring Mr. Heseltine universal acclaim.
Channel Tunnel workers have linked the 2 halves of the first main rail tunnel between England and France. Until now, only a small service tunnel linked Britain to the continent. The breakthrough took place 160 feet below the seabed, 3 months ahead of schedule. It's expected the first passengers will travel through the tunnel in 1993. Tonight's main news again. Rajiv Gandhi's widow has been chosen to succeed her murdered husband as head of India's Congress Party. It's not yet clear whether she'll accept the job. More on Newsnight on BBC 2 at 10:30, but that is the 9 o'clock news tonight. Good night.
Now on BBC One, the evening headlines from the newsroom of South Today.
Good evening. Southampton Football Club is without a manager after sacking Chris Nicholl today. The job's already being linked to names such as Harry Redknapp, the Bournemouth manager, team captain Jimmy Case, and former players Peter Shilton and Kevin Keegan. Nicholl led the Saints with moderate success for 6 seasons, but never won a trophy. The team coach is also leaving, though Nicholl insists they're going with dignity.
I don't feel a failure. I think I can walk around Southampton and hope Dennis Rowe can hold his head up. That's the way I'd like to go out. There's absolutely no animosity between me or anybody here.
Two men have tonight been charged with causing grievous bodily harm following an incident in Chichester in which a man was stabbed through the heart. David Yates is in intensive care in St Richard's Hospital. The two men will appear in court tomorrow. The rescue of birds caught in the Gulf oil slick has inspired an ambitious project for the RSPCA, which is based at Horsham in West Sussex. 3 officers have spent time in Saudi Arabia and are now hoping to set up the first permanent wildlife centre in Saudi Arabia. Soldiers from the south are already helping to save some of the birds, and the plan is to have a purpose-built centre at Al Jubail. Controversial plans for a £16 million road scheme to ease traffic congestion in Wokingham have been given government approval today. The Inner Ring Road scheme is designed to reduce traffic flow in the town centre and involves rebuilding the railway station. Football now, and Brighton are on their way to Wembley next month to decide a place in the First Division. The latest score is Millwall 1, Brighton 2, which means Brighton are winning 6-2 on aggregate. That's it. Now the weather with Suzanne Charlton.
Good evening. It's been another sunny day in many areas. Some parts of the south seeing 12, 13 hours of sunshine. Not half that much up in parts of southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland. Prestwick, Belfast, just 2 or 3 hours at the best. Well, we can see why when we look at the satellite pictures. There's been a good deal of cloud there right throughout the day. There's some thicker stuff out over the Atlantic too, and that's just feeding in down there now, introducing some more moist air, if I can say it, over parts of southwest Scotland, Northern Ireland, and down towards the parts of the Northern Irish Sea there. The clouds breaking up very nicely, though, over southern areas in particular and up the east coast. And with clear skies in central Scotland tonight, there will be some ground frost there. In fact, fairly chilly over much of Scotland. But for Northern Ireland, Wales and England, 10 or 11 the lowest, 50 at rock bottom tonight, Fahrenheit. Well, that high pressure area is still right the way over the top of Ireland during tomorrow, and that's going to mean that this weather system here, the weather front, is going to be really very weak indeed. But it will have some implications, certainly a band of cloud, low cloud, some sea and hill fog around, and some patchy drizzle too. And that will move out of Northern Ireland through southwest Scotland and up the west coast up towards the Outer Hebrides by tomorrow afternoon. As for the rest of us, well, I think we can more or less fill ourselves in with bright and even sunny weather, though there'll be some cloud developing during the middle of the afternoon. Temperatures will be a touch down on those of today by another degree or so, feeling a little bit cool down the eastern side of England and up through the Irish Sea and the western side of Scotland where that low cloud lingers on. Highest temperatures probably in the south or southwest, 20, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. On Friday, still bright, still some sunshine around and basically dry. Some drizzly weather in the far northwest. That's where the weather fronts will be. They'll topple across though during the weekend, and that weather front there could just bring the odd shower to the east coast during Saturday. Could begin to feel rather cooler day by day, but there'll still be some dry and quite sunny weather to be found. That's all from me.
If you don't want to miss out on the best of TV and radio, then you've simply got to get the Radio Times, the all-channel guide. Naturally, BBC One's #1 SOS Awards are not to be missed, but if you're feeling just a little bit behind the times, then don't worry, I'll bring you bang up to date with who's who. So you see, Radio Times not only tells you what's what and when, but it's entertainment itself. And this week, there's even a free souvenir stamp offer into the bargain. For the best in TV and radio, Radio Times, if it's on, it's in.
The Cannes Film Festival is where Barry Norman joins this year's guest stars, Madonna and Arnold Schwarzenegger, in 50 minutes from now. This is BBC One. It's 12 weeks since the Gulf War ended. Since then, the media spotlight has turned its attention elsewhere. But tonight's Inside Story goes back to Kuwait to tell the story of families who, in the aftermath of war, still have relatives among the missing.